The galaxy was wide, endless, and filled with empires older than human history. To them, Earth was nothing. Just a small blue world at the edge of a forgotten spiral arm. A young species still crawling on its knees, still learning how to walk among the stars. The great alien warlords laughed when they spoke of humans. Short-lived, weak, divided. They will never last, they said. But arrogance has always been the weakness of conquerors. The invaders came without warning. Their fleets appeared in the skies like storms of steel and fire. Entire nations were silenced in hours. Cities burned so bright they could be seen from orbit. The oceans boiled with falling wreckage. Skies turned red with ash and smoke. Humanity in its innocence believed it had time to prepare, time to learn, time to grow. But the galaxy did not wait. The galaxy came with chains. Families were torn apart. Children were dragged into ships that never came back. Soldiers fired rifles at war machines the size of mountains, their bullets sparking uselessly against alien armor. The Earth shook under the weight of giants. Resistance was brave, but bravery alone cannot hold back a storm. At first, humans thought their leaders would save them. Armies rallied. Fleets launched. But the warlords had already fought greater empires, civilizations that had lasted for tens of thousands of years. Compared to them, Earth's fleets were fragile toys. Carriers and cruisers were torn open like paper, their crews scattered among the stars. Nations surrendered. Governments crumbled. Humanity was broken. Yet something strange happened. Even in defeat, the fire did not die. In the ruins of cities, survivors whispered to one another, "This is not the end. We will not kneel forever." In the darkness of basements, in caves carved into mountains, in the silence of burned forests, they began to dream, not of survival, not of peace, but of vengeance. The invaders called Earth conquered. They called it the farm, a world to drain for resources, slaves and soldiers for their endless wars. Alien warlords sat upon their high thrones and celebrated their easy victory. They thought humans were finished. But the warlords did not understand the nature of mankind. Humans are stubborn. They are defiant. They are the kind of creatures who keep fighting even when they have already lost. In the shadows of the occupation, something began to take shape. Stolen machines, hidden workshops, secret meetings whispered under the eyes of alien patrols. Engineers worked with scraps and wreckage, fusing alien technology with human creativity. Pilots practiced in stolen simulators, memorizing star maps from fragments. What began as rumor soon grew into something real. A fleet was being born. Not a fleet like the ones of the invaders, made of polished warships and banners of empire. This was a fleet of shadows, of stolen steel and desperate courage. A fleet painted black so it could hide in the void, moving like ghosts between the stars. When the first of these ships lifted into space, the enslaved on Earth raised their heads. They saw a sign. They saw hope. The invaders had crushed armies and destroyed cities, but they had not broken the human spirit. The first human jet, built from broken parts, from wreckage and sweat, cut across the night sky. It was small compared to alien warships, fragile compared to their dreadnoughts, but inside that cockpit sat a human who refused to surrender. And that made all the difference. The galaxy thought humanity was finished, but in the silence after defeat, in the shadows after fire, something stronger than fear had been born. It was defiance. It was a whisper that became a promise. It was a promise that became a fleet. It was a fleet that would one day strike back. And when that day came, the galaxy would no longer laugh at Earth. The galaxy would tremble. Humanity had been broken, but broken things, when reforged, are sharpest. This was only the beginning. In the early days after Earth's fall, there was silence. The silence of grief, the silence of fear. But within that silence, the seeds of resistance grew. The survivors carried pain like a second skin, but pain can turn into something powerful if it finds direction. For humanity, that direction was the stars. The alien warlords thought they had ended every organized defense. They destroyed the armies, shattered fleets, and burned the capitals. Yet in the shadows, humans began again. Not openly, not proudly, but secretly, like sparks waiting to grow into fire. It started with scraps, pieces of alien wreckage scavenged from battlefields, broken engines dragged out of craters, twisted metal that once belonged to invader war machines. Human engineers, tired, hungry, desperate, bent over the wreckage in basements, caves, and underground tunnels. They learned. They copied. They built. With every bolt tightened and every wire connected, they were shaping something new. Not just machines, but hope. The first crafts were ugly, crude hybrids of alien design and human stubbornness. They looked nothing like the sleek vessels of the invaders. They were stitched together with iron and welding fire, patched with whatever could be found. Some parts were salvaged from fallen skyscrapers, some from old human jets, and some from alien ships torn apart in explosions. But ugly or not, they could fly. And in war, flight meant life. Pilots trained in secret. Some were former military. Their uniforms burned when their nations fell. Others were simple civilians, farmers, miners, students, who had lost everything and volunteered for revenge. They sat in cockpits that rattled like old machines, practicing maneuvers in darkness. They did not have simulators worthy of armies, but they had determination. They flew again and again until the controls became part of their hands, until the stars outside the window became as familiar as the streets of their childhood. These pilots did not dream of glory. They did not expect medals or statues. Their reward was simpler: the chance to fight back, the chance to strike fear into the monsters who had stolen their world. When the first fleet came together, it had no anthem. No flag, no speeches. The ships were painted black, their surfaces rough, their hulls scarred with the marks of rushed construction. They carried no banners because humans did not need to announce themselves. They only needed to be seen when it was too late for their enemies. They called themselves the Shadow Fleet. The name was whispered, not shouted. It was carried from mouth to mouth, from one hidden camp to another. At first, few believed it. They thought it was only a story told to comfort the enslaved, a rumor born from desperation. But then one night the rumor became truth. A small alien convoy carrying weapons and supplies vanished without a trace. Then another. A warship sent to investigate never reported back. Patrols whispered of ghost ships that came from the black void, struck without warning, and disappeared again. The warlords dismissed it as chance, as malfunction, as cowardice in their own ranks. But the truth spread quickly among the enslaved. Humanity was still alive. Humanity was still fighting. The Shadow Fleet grew with every strike. Each wrecked alien ship gave more material. Each freed prisoner added another pilot, another mechanic, another builder. The fleet was not just machines. It was people. Ordinary humans who refused to kneel, who risked everything to rise again. Each jet carried a story. One was painted with the names of a pilot's lost family. Another had a small pair of children's shoes tied inside the cockpit. Another carried a letter from a wife to her husband, sealed under the seat, never meant to be opened, only meant to remind him why he fought. They were not soldiers anymore. They were shadows. They were vengeance with wings. When the first Shadow Fleet jet entered space, silence fell over the underground base. Mechanics stopped working. Pilots held their breath. The engines roared, trembling against the metal hangar before the ship slipped into the dark sky. That moment was more than flight. It was rebirth. For the first time since the invasion, humans looked at the stars and felt hope instead of despair. The warlords had taken Earth. They had enslaved nations. They had broken armies. But from that brokenness rose something the warlords could not kill. A fleet without a nation. A fleet without a home. A fleet born in shadow. And soon, the galaxy would learn to fear the name whispered in silence. The Shadow Fleet. The galaxy was still laughing at Earth when the Shadow Fleet struck for the first time. To the warlords, humanity was nothing more than a defeated species. They believed the humans had been tamed, their fire broken, their world chained. The idea of resistance seemed foolish. But the galaxy did not yet understand the human heart. The first strike came in silence. A convoy of alien freighters drifted through the black void, carrying weapons and supplies for the warlord armies. They were heavily guarded, confident in their escorts. No one expected trouble. No one even thought of humans. And then the shadows moved. From the dark, small human jets appeared. Their hulls painted black, their engines whispering, their weapons locked. They came like ghosts, like nightmares made real. In seconds, missiles streaked across the stars. The convoy exploded into fire and debris. The alien escorts fired back, confused, panicked. But the jets were already gone, vanishing into the void before the warlords could even understand what had happened. The invaders were stunned. Ships did not just vanish. Fleets did not simply appear and disappear. Who had done this? Who had the courage to strike? The answer spread like wildfire in whispers. It was the humans. The Shadow Fleet had begun its hunt. Each raid was sharper, stronger, braver. Supply lines vanished. Warships went silent. Colonies under the warlords' control woke one night to find alien garrisons destroyed, their chains broken by unseen hands. The Shadow Fleet moved like smoke, impossible to catch, impossible to predict. The aliens had once hunted humanity like prey, but now the roles were changing. For the pilots, every mission carried a story. There was Captain Elias, who flew with his daughter's shoes tied above his console, a reminder of the family he lost when the warlords burned his home. He whispered to those shoes before every launch, "For you, little star." He never missed his target. There was Lyra, who had been a farmer before the invasion. She painted the name of her destroyed village on the side of her jet. Every alien ship she burned was marked in her memory as one more step toward justice. She flew like fire, fearless even when outnumbered. There was Jonah, a mechanic-turned-pilot who carried a folded letter from his wife beneath his seat. She had died in the first bombings, but her words remained, "Fight if you must, but come home to me." Jonah never came home, but he made sure dozens of alien warships never went home either. These pilots did not think of themselves as heroes. They were not fighting for glory. They were fighting because they had nothing left but the fight. Because to them, survival without freedom was not living, it was only breathing. The warlords began to fear. For the first time in centuries, they were not in control. Reports filled their courts of phantoms that appeared in the night, striking with precision and vanishing before any response could be made. Alien captains begged for reinforcements, afraid to patrol human space. Entire sectors became graveyards of broken warships, their wrecks orbiting silent planets like warnings. The Shadow Fleet learned quickly. Each raid gave them more technology, more wreckage to rebuild, more courage to fight. Every victory made them stronger. Every defeat made them wiser. The invaders could not understand how such a primitive species could adapt so quickly. But humans had always been survivors. They had always learned by fire. The galaxy watched in silence as the impossible happened. Humanity was not only alive, they were striking back, and with every strike, the enslaved across the stars felt hope. Species long crushed under alien rule heard the whispers of human vengeance. The humans fight, they said. The humans rise. In their chains, they lifted their heads again. If Earth could resist, perhaps others could too. The Shadow Fleet did not seek fame, but their legend grew. They were painted on walls in hidden camps, their symbol carved into prison stones, their name spoken like a prayer, Shadow Fleet. To the invaders, they were a nightmare that refused to fade. To the enslaved, they were a promise that freedom could return. To the humans themselves, they were proof that even in ruin, they were still human. And so the hunted became the hunters. The invaders who once marched proudly now moved in fear. They whispered in their throne rooms, asking one another, "Where will the humans strike next? Whose fleet will vanish tomorrow? Which of us will be the next to fall?" The Shadow Fleet did not answer with words. They answered with fire. The alien warlords had once walked the galaxy like gods. Their fleets darkened skies, their armies crushed worlds, and their voices carried fear across 1,000 systems. They believed themselves untouchable. But then came the humans, the broken species, the enslaved prey, and everything began to change. The Shadow Fleet was no longer just a rumor. It was a terror that spread from star to star. At first, the warlords dismissed the attacks as isolated accidents, perhaps a mutiny, perhaps pirates, perhaps foolish resistance. But as the months turned to years, they could not deny the truth. The humans were hunting them. Alien captains refused to travel through certain regions of space. They feared the black-painted jets that appeared without warning. Convoys moved slower, weighed down by escorts, yet still disappeared into silence. Fleets that once marched proudly now limped through the stars, their hulls scarred, their crews shaken. The warlords, who had once feasted on their victories, began to whisper in their golden halls. They argued, they shouted, they searched for explanations. How can this be? They were broken. Their armies were gone. Their world was ours. But the truth gnawed at them. The humans were not broken. They were sharpening themselves in the dark. For the pilots of the Shadow Fleet, this reversal was fuel. They remembered the days when humans were hunted like animals, when soldiers were dragged into camps, when children screamed under alien chains. Now every mission was a reminder that justice was not a dream. It was real. One mission became a legend. A massive alien dreadnought, a ship feared across the galaxy, was ambushed by only 5 human jets. To any outsider, it should have been suicide. The dreadnought was a fortress of steel, bristling with weapons guarded by escort ships. Yet the humans struck with precision. They darted between gunfire, missiles streaking through the void. They cut through weak points, targeting engines, fuel lines, and weapon cores. When the final explosion consumed the dreadnought, the enslaved across dozens of systems cheered in secret. The aliens had hunted humans. Now the humans hunted them. Alien warlords began to change their behavior. They no longer sat comfortably on their thrones. They reinforced their palaces. They surrounded themselves with guards. They hired assassins to find and kill the human leaders. But the leaders of the Shadow Fleet were ghosts, hidden in shadows, impossible to find. The warlords, who once inspired terror, now lived in fear of the very species they had once mocked. And that fear spread to their soldiers. Alien troops who had once laughed as they conquered Earth now trembled when assigned to human sectors. They spoke of phantoms in the void and death without warning. Some deserted. Some refused to fight. Some begged their commanders to transfer them far away from human space. The mighty war machine of the warlords began to rot from within. The galaxy watched closely. Other enslaved species saw the shift. They had bowed their heads for generations, believing the warlords could never be defeated. But now they heard stories of human shadows striking down fleets, of thrones shaking, of tyrants looking over their shoulders. Hope, once thought extinct, began to flicker again in alien hearts. Still, the warlords tried to hold power. They increased patrols, they built new ships, they executed their own officers for failures. But nothing stopped the Shadow Fleet. For every new ship built, a convoy was destroyed. For every patrol sent out, only half returned. For every show of strength, the humans answered with another strike. The hunted had learned patience. The hunted had learned precision. The hunted had learned how to become hunters. And in their silence, in their shadows, the humans whispered a truth the warlords could no longer ignore. You should have killed us all when you had the chance. One by one, the alien warlords realized the cost of their arrogance. They had thought humanity weak. They had thought humanity broken. But broken things, reforged, can cut deeper than ever before. Now, the hunters who once stalked Earth were the ones being stalked, and there was no corner of the galaxy dark enough to hide from the shadows of humanity. The mighty warlords who once ruled with fire and chains had never known fear. They had crushed empires older than human history. They had enslaved species that had walked the stars long before Earth lit its first fire. They had always been the hunters, the predators, the masters of war. But now they were trembling. The Shadow Fleet had torn away their pride. Convoys vanished. Armies withered. Ships were lost faster than they could be built. Every throne world lived in dread of the next attack. The warlords, for all their cruelty, could not escape the truth. Humanity had become the storm that stalked them. At first, the warlords roared in anger. They executed their own officers for failures, blaming weakness instead of their own arrogance. They sent fleets to hunt the Shadow Fleet, fleets larger than anything humans had ever faced. But the humans were not foolish. They did not fight fair battles. They struck and vanished, burned and fled. They turned the strength of the warlords into chains around their necks. The warlords had wanted obedience. What they received was terror. Desperation crept into their golden halls. No longer did they sit tall and proud. Now they whispered to their advisors, their eyes darting to the shadows. They feared assassination, feared sabotage, feared the humans who seemed to appear wherever they wished. And so, for the first time in their bloody history, the warlords did something unthinkable. They pleaded. From their throne worlds, they sent messages across the stars. Broadcasts filled the galaxy with promises. Humans, we offer peace. We offer freedom. We offer trade and forgiveness. Lay down your arms and we shall restore what we have taken. But humanity remembered. They remembered the cities burned to ash. They remembered the children stolen. They remembered the chains on their wrists and the graves dug by alien hands. No promise could wash away the rivers of blood. No bargain could erase the screams. The Shadow Fleet gave no answer to the warlords' messages. They replied only with silence. And then days later, with fire, another throne world shipyard burned, another warlord's palace shattered in explosions. Another army vanished into the black void, leaving behind only drifting wreckage. The pleading grew louder. Some warlords bent their knees before the Galactic Council, begging for protection from the Terran phantoms. They cried that humanity was too dangerous, too wild, too merciless to be allowed to live. But the Council only laughed. These were the same warlords who had once bragged of their power, who had once claimed no foe could challenge them. Now they begged for help against the very species they had called weak. Their humiliation was complete. One warlord, desperate beyond reason, opened his own vaults to buy peace. He sent ships filled with treasure, slaves, and weapons toward human-controlled space. But when the convoy arrived, the humans freed the slaves, took the weapons, and left the treasure to drift in the void. The warlord's offer had been answered not with words but with contempt. The message was clear. Humanity could not be bought. Humanity could not be bribed. Humanity could not be silenced. The enslaved species of the galaxy watched all of this with wide eyes. For generations they had lived under the rule of the warlords. They had never seen them bend, never seen them break. But now, thanks to the humans, they watched their masters beg like children, and hope grew in their hearts like fire in dry grass. The warlords had thought themselves eternal. They believed their thrones would never fall. Yet here they were, pleading, begging, crying in fear of a species they had once thought beneath them. The galaxy would remember this forever, and the humans, they did not answer with forgiveness. They did not answer with mercy. They had learned too much in the ashes of their world. To every plea, the Shadow Fleet answered with silence. To every promise, they answered with fire. To every bargain, they answered with another throne burning. The warlords, once the hunters of the stars, had become prey crying out for mercy. But in the cold dark of space, mercy was not given. It was earned, and the warlords had earned nothing. The warlords once believed their thrones were eternal. Their palaces were built on worlds covered in gold and stone, guarded by fleets of warships and armies of soldiers. They believed no enemy could ever reach them. No force could ever shake their crowns. But they had never faced the wrath of the Shadow Fleet. The humans did not strike like armies of old. They did not march with banners or announce their arrival. They came in silence, their black-painted jets streaking across alien skies, their engines whispering death. Where once the warlords had stood proud, now there was only fire. The first throne world to fall was drenched in arrogance. Its ruler, Warlord Kartek, had mocked the idea of human vengeance. He boasted to the council that his world was impenetrable, his fleets unmatched. But in one night his shipyards became burning craters. The Shadow Fleet slipped past defenses, planting explosives with precision. His warships, still docked, erupted like dying stars. By dawn, the once mighty ruler was crawling among ruins, screaming at shadows that never answered. The galaxy trembled. If one throne could burn, so could all the others. The Shadow Fleet made no speeches, no declarations. They were not conquerors, they were dismantlers. They destroyed the symbols of tyranny, not to claim them but to erase them. Where warlords had ruled with chains, the humans left freedom. In one raid, a palace filled with enslaved species was stormed. The guards were struck down in silence, their weapons useless against the sudden strike. When the humans entered, the slaves thought it was another trick, another punishment. But instead of chains, the humans gave them weapons. Instead of orders, they gave them freedom. "This world is yours now," a human pilot whispered before vanishing into the skies. That planet never forgot the moment. Again and again the thrones fell. The warlords grew desperate. They fortified their worlds with shields, traps, endless defenses. But the Shadow Fleet always found a way. Where brute force could not win, cunning did. Where walls were thick, patience was thicker. Humans would wait in silence for weeks, even months, until the perfect moment came. And then, like shadows, they struck. And the throne cracked once more. The galaxy began to speak a new truth. No king, no emperor, no tyrant is safe from the humans. Every species enslaved under the warlords felt the change. The humans did not keep the worlds they freed. They did not demand tribute or kneeling. They only left fire where thrones once stood, and hope where chains once rattled. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy saw conquerors defeated not by greater conquerors but by defiance itself. The Shadow Fleet grew into more than warriors. They became a legend. Children in slave camps whispered of them before sleep. Black ships that hunted warlords, humans who turned night into freedom. Songs rose in hidden corners of alien worlds, praising the nameless pilots who risked everything for vengeance and justice. Even within human ranks, the war was personal. Each pilot carried pain in their heart, and that pain became strength. Some marked their ships with the names of lost families. Others carved symbols into their hulls, prayers for revenge. Every time a throne burned, a scar in humanity's soul healed a little. But vengeance alone was not the end. With each strike, the Shadow Fleet proved a greater truth. Humanity was not only fighting for itself. It was fighting for every enslaved being in the galaxy. Their defiance was no longer just about Earth. It was about freedom for all. The warlords could not understand this. They had ruled for so long with fear and greed that the idea of fighting for something greater than survival was alien to them. They saw humanity as reckless, mad, suicidal. But they did not realize that madness mixed with courage is unstoppable. And so the thrones fell one by one. Palaces of gold turned to ashes. Empires older than human nations cracked and broke. The warlords who had laughed at Earth now wept in their halls, their crowns trembling on their heads. The Shadow Fleet did not stop. They could not stop. Humanity had lost too much to turn back now. The galaxy once believed humans would never rise. But as throne after throne turned to rubble, as the cries of the warlords echoed through the stars, the truth became clear. The age of tyrants was ending. The age of humanity was rising, and no throne, no matter how high, could escape its doom. The galaxy had changed. The once untouchable warlords were no longer gods. Their fleets were scattered, their palaces reduced to rubble, their voices trembling with fear. Where their thrones had stood for centuries, only silence remained. And in that silence, a new sound was rising, the heartbeat of humanity. The Shadow Fleet did not pause to celebrate. Victory was never their goal. Their mission had never been about glory, nor about conquest. It had always been about survival, justice, and the unyielding promise that no one would ever again make Earth kneel. But with every throne destroyed, something greater began to grow. The enslaved worlds that had once been forced into obedience now looked to the humans with awe. They saw not conquerors but liberators. They saw fighters who bled for strangers, who gave freedom without demanding tribute, who left behind hope instead of chains. For the first time in ages, the galaxy believed in something new. The legend of the humans spread faster than fire. Stories were told in quiet villages and in ruined cities. Children whispered of black ships that came from the stars, carrying warriors who fought like shadows and struck like storms. Songs were sung in languages humans could not even understand, but the meaning was always the same. The humans have risen, and with them, freedom rises too. Even the oldest species of the galaxy, those who had watched the warlords rule for centuries, were shaken. They had thought humanity was weak, a young species destined to be crushed, but the humans had proved them wrong. With nothing but broken hearts, fierce courage, and unbreakable unity, they had achieved what no empire had dared. They had ended the reign of tyrants. Yet, victory came with a price. Many pilots of the Shadow Fleet never returned. Their ships vanished into flames, their names whispered in mourning. On Earth, families waited for loved ones who would never walk through the door again. The victories were heavy, and each triumph carried sorrow. But the humans did not see those sacrifices as wasted. They saw them as seeds, seeds of a future where children would grow without fear. Among the pilots there was a belief. Every star freed was a soul avenged. That belief kept them strong even in their darkest nights. When the last great warlord fell, his cry echoed across the stars. His palace crumbled, his fleet shattered, his crown meaningless in the dust. With him ended the age of tyranny. No more chains, no more masters. The galaxy was free. And in the center of this new dawn stood humanity. But they did not declare themselves rulers. They did not build empires or demand loyalty. Instead, they turned to the freed worlds and spoke words no tyrant had ever said. You are free. Your future is yours. We ask for nothing but peace. That moment changed everything. Species that had once looked down on humans now stood beside them as equals. Old enemies became allies. A council was formed not of rulers, but of voices from many worlds, and at that table, humanity held a seat, not as conquerors but as brothers and sisters of the stars. The Shadow Fleet slowly dissolved into legend. Some ships returned to Earth, some stayed to guard the weak, and some disappeared forever, wandering into the unknown. But their story lived on. Generations later, children still listened wide-eyed to tales of the black ships. They dreamed of the courage that had burned away the thrones of tyrants. They dreamed of the humans who had stood when no one else would. And every time the story was told, the same lesson was remembered. Even the smallest spark can burn down a throne. For Earth, the war had been more than vengeance. It had been a rebirth. Humanity had stepped into the galaxy not as victims but as warriors. And though they carried scars, they also carried pride. The stars that once mocked them now welcomed them, and the universe that once tried to break them now remembered their strength. The galaxy was vast, and dangers still remained. New challenges would come, new shadows would rise, but one truth had been written forever in the history of the stars. Humanity would never again be silent. Where there was tyranny, they would fight. Where there was darkness, they would burn like fire. And so the story of humanity did not end with vengeance. It ended with a promise that no throne, no chain, and no tyrant would ever again rule unchallenged. The age of warlords was gone. The dawn of humanity had begun.